Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another review. So it's October, which means that it's Halloween. I had a tournament between 4 books to see which one got the highest amount of votes to see which book I should review next. It was between Death Note, Walking Dead, Nailbiter, and the one that won overall with a massive 67% of the vote was the one that we're going to be talking about today, and that is Postal. So this book was written by Matt Hawkins and Brian Hill, and the art was primarily done by Isaac Goodhart. The main 25 issues, which are collected in this beautiful oversized hardcover, ran between February 2015 and January 2018, and it was originally published by Top Cow Productions, but then they get brought out by Image, which is why you'll see the Image logo at the top of this book. Interestingly enough, this hardcover that most of you will see in a lot of people's collections now was actually the result of a Kickstarter project, and you can see the names of the people who funded it in the back. But this book did receive quite mixed reviews, especially when it was coming out issue to issue. The sales for the single issues as well diminished as the series was continuing to be printed, but they actually saw that the trade paperbacks that they were releasing did continue to increase in sales as they got into later volumes. But none of that ever really factors into the way I do my reviews, so we're going to take a look at the book, we're going to take a look at the plot, the art, we're going to do a spoiler-free section, and then we're going to get into spoilers. All before I give you my final verdict, and this time I'm going to make sure that I actually put the timestamps down below. But that's enough of me waffling, let's just get into my too long didn't watch. Now the TLDW is a section of the video where I basically break down the overall summary of this review in case you really can't be bothered to watch the full thing. And for me, this was a really enjoyable slow burner that was more political drama than horror. As you're reading it in the single issues, this is great and enjoyable, but when I think about the book as a whole, it probably didn't pay off as much as I thought the premise would have done. So if that's all the video that you need, hopefully you enjoyed this book, please give it a like if you've enjoyed this video, and click that subscribe button and become part of the Dog Pound. But for those wanting something a bit more in depth, let's just start with the plot. Postal is a story of a small American town called Eden, which is a place created by criminals for criminals. It's completely off the map, only a few people outside of Eden even know they exist, and they've got their own way of life and their own civilization. Our main character is Mark. He's the town's postman, he suffers from Asperger's syndrome, and he's also the son of the mayor, Laura. The main storyline of this book is followed through these two characters, because Mark's dad, Isaac, was also the original creator of Eden, who also got banished from the city, and is trying to find a way to reclaim it for himself. But throughout the book, as we are building up to that main conflict, we're also introduced to other characters who live in Eden. So you've got a one-armed boxer, you've got a former Nazi, and you've also got a waitress called Maggie. Maggie is the main love interest for Mark, and she's got some shady ties initially with the FBI. Speaking of the FBI, there's also agents that are trying to learn more about Eden and find a way into it, and we're also introduced to a new arrival into Eden called Molly. But all of these characters and the allegiances that they have with each other build up the story until it all comes to a head. So who will be the true leader of Eden? Can Mark step out of the shadow of his parents and become his own man? And what happens when someone tries to leave Eden, or worse, tries to get in? The art for me was pretty much just there. There was nothing I really disliked, but when I looked at the synopsis for the story and had a look at some of the covers for the book, I was expecting something a bit different. It's not fair for me to judge a book too harshly because I was expecting something different, but when I look at the story, I did think that we were going to get something a bit more gritty. You know, something like a Sean Phillips, or maybe even more abstract with like a Ben Templesmith. I may be the only one who thinks this, but the style really reminded me of that show Archer, especially with Mark's design and the fact that Bremble kind of looked similar to him as well, along with being an FBI agent. And that was one of the issues for me. I didn't feel like there was a great variety in the art. Like I said, sometimes I could get confused between Mark and Agent Bremble. But one thing that I did really enjoy was the look of the town throughout the book. Like I often found myself looking behind the characters at the detail that I found there. I'm not sure if I heard this correctly, but I believe that Goodhart actually designed a lot of storyboards, and that's where his main plethora of experience comes from. And it does show because there is that great level of detail, especially if you do take the time to look a bit behind the characters. And another thing that I really liked was the way that panels were laid out in unique and interesting ways. So it did that thing that I like that not a lot of comics do, where they will put art within words. So if something says boom, you will see the art within that word, and I really enjoy when comics do that, and I don't think that enough creators actually do enough to try and like break through and do something a little bit different and subvert your expectations. Scattered throughout the book as well, there are also some dream sequences and flashbacks where the art does change a little bit, and sometimes it's got more of a watercolour style. I like these and they were a welcome change, and that was kind of the style that I thought we were probably going to get from the beginning. And having that did just give you a bit of a welcome change from the standard style of art, and it gave those scenes something unique about them that did set them apart from the real world. One of the additional stories at the back had a completely different art style, and weirdly, even though I'm saying that the main art was just there, I think changing the art style wasn't really a good move, because even though it wasn't what I expected, it's what I'd come to expect by the end, so I was hoping that the art would just continue in that way, and the fact that it was pretty much just one issue that was slightly different just felt a bit weird to me. But overall, I do know that a lot of people like to see a smooth, clean style of art, and I think this is one that would work for a lot of people, and I feel like if I saw it in a different book, I'd really enjoy it there as well. But given the story and the themes of the book, I do think it would have worked better if there was just something a bit more abstract about the art. So now we're getting into the spoiler-free discussion, and I think this might be the shortest spoiler-free section that I'm going to do in any of my reviews. But this book worked best for me when it was about the politics of the town and the relationships between the characters. Oddly enough, the plotline that I cared least about was between Mark and his dad Isaac. It seemed to really be the focus of the story at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, but for the bulk of the story in the middle, it just was sort of an afterthought. Like, it did feel like the equivalent of a video game where a big boss is revealed at the beginning and you can't defeat him, but then he just reappears at the end, but you've already gone through this entire journey, so it doesn't really matter what he brings to the table. What I did really like in the book was how Laura functioned as both the mayor of Eden and also as a mother. It was really interesting to see how she would often use Mark for her own sort of needs, and you kind of often questioned if she really loved him as a son or she just needed him for what she needed him to do. And this also had a great effect on her relationship that she had with the sheriff, and often you found yourself questioning if she liked that relationship more with him than she did the connection that she's got with her own son. But my three favourite parts of this book were the boxing storyline where the guy had one arm, the former Nazi that was trying to redeem himself and go against the group that he was originally with, and also the entire Molly subplot. And speaking about that Molly subplot, I do wish it had a bit more focus, because again, like we were saying with the father, it did feel like they often forgot that this was a plot that they had up in the air and just kept returning to it because of the fact that we'd probably ask where it was if they didn't. Again, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything here, but I do feel that the final part of this storyline, especially the main part of the comic, was a little bit anticlimactic. It had been built up from issue 1, but then it felt quite small on scale, like it was literally just a couple of people in a street. And there was also quite a drastic left turn that I wasn't really too happy with, that I'm going to have to talk about in the spoiler section. And something that was a little bit disappointing for me was that everybody sold this book to me as something that's really smart, really intelligent and really complex. And although I can see that in the relationships, when it comes to the plot itself, I felt like it often strayed into just being like similar to most young adult novels. So you have this town that's got its own way of living, and you've got people that are the rebellion that are trying to go against it, and you've got the main character that doesn't know which side of that coin he wants to be on. And then there's a love triangle, and he's got strained relationships with his parents. I honestly feel like I could have got like a young adult fiction bingo and probably ticked off most of them in Postal. However, I feel like if I haven't already said too much, I'm going to in a minute, so let's just jump into the spoiler section. My boy Highland G warned me about this, but for the sake of the review and the fact that I've got them in the book, I did have to read them. But the final two issues, the sort of one-shots that came out after the main series, diminished a lot of what I really enjoyed about the 25th issue of the main series. I go back and forth on if I like an open ending or not, but with this, I really liked that it seemed like they were going to leave it up in the air whether Laura kills herself or not. I like that you saw Mark getting a little bit emotional despite his Asperger's, which kind of gravitated how heavy this situation is. That point may seem a bit moot because of the fact that the series has continued in a new ongoing series, but for me, I just wish those last two issues weren't there because I don't really feel like it added too much for me. But what I did like in those epilogue style chapters is the fact that Mark finally got some closure with his father. This really tied up the arc nicely because of the fact that in issue 1, Mark was this vulnerable character who didn't seem to be able to function on his own. He couldn't help himself in any situation, and now he's someone that's making these important decisions and impacting other people as a result. This pretty much fulfilled the prophecy that his dad had effectively created for him in issue 2, but I liked that Mark's development in building into his own man was pretty much the driving force for the entire book. And the two major plot points from that I enjoyed most were the Molly story arc and also when he temporarily became mayor. I can't lie, Mark did well for himself in this book. Like, I wish I could give him a high five if he was a real person. And in case you're wondering, because anybody who's read this book has asked himself the same question, I'd go with Molly. But even though I enjoyed it whilst I was reading it, once that story plot was done and Molly was dead, I feel like she served nothing more than being the third point so that they could have a love triangle that was literally the equivalent of a storyline that I saw in the first season of the OC. Like, realistically, once he'd kept her in the cage, and even though he had sex with her at one point after that, she didn't really add too much to the story, except for the fact that she was kind of like a lingering plot point that could come back. And for me, it felt like they'd probably written themselves into a bit of a corner where they didn't really know what they wanted to do with it, so all they did in the end was just, after keeping her captive, they just killed her. I felt like it was going to pay off a bit more than that, and although, like I said, her death scene was great, the overall storyline didn't really add much to the overall book for me besides Mark's development. Like, I didn't really like Maggie too much at that part in the book. Yeah, my feelings towards her changed a little bit and did feel bad when Molly attacked her, but I felt like Molly added more to Mark's life than Maggie did. And there was that point where Maggie was talking about how she was tempted to leave Eden, and there was these plans in place, and there was even later plans between her and Mark to leave Eden. All of that just felt like discussion for the sake of tension because it didn't ever really pay off. Sure, it did help set some plot points that then could later be paid off by Laura, but for me, it didn't really pay off in the way that I thought it was going to. And I know it probably feels like I say this in near enough every book that I review, but maybe they could have shaved about 5 issues or so off the main series because of the fact that there's these plot points that didn't really seem to go anywhere, or they got dragged out for quite a long amount of time. I've also seen a lot of talk about the way that Asperger's is being handled in this book, and I've seen people recommending it as like a great example of how representation should be done, and I've also seen people saying that they haven't got it right at all. I feel like I have to address this point just because of the fact that it is a main talking point for the book, but I don't really know enough about Asperger's to really comment on the way that it's being represented in this book. But what I really did like about Mark as a character, and it might have been as a result of his Asperger's, I feel like this gave him a level of being cold that matched with his mother but for a different reason. Him becoming mayor was the most tense part of this story as well. We'd seen the way that that role had affected his mother's health in an earlier issue, and from issue 1 we'd already seen that people don't respect Mark as a person anyway when he didn't have any power to begin with. This is also evident in the fact that Maggie was one of the people that tried to overthrow Mark. The way Mark handled conflicts as well was just unbearably tense, and it was something that I haven't felt in a book for a long time. You just didn't know if him taking a different approach from his mom and kind of being a little bit more forgiving, but also having this kind of threat in the background. You didn't know if that was something that was going to come back to haunt him, you know, maybe somebody just like abused the power too much, or you didn't know if somebody was just going to call Mark's bluff and see if he actually would take the next step and kill someone. Another thing that threw me for a loop was how little of an impact the murder at the beginning really had. Don't get me wrong, I don't feel like that mystery could have been sustained for 25 issues, and I like the way that the story planned out instead, but considering it was the daughter of the mayor and the sister of the main character, it kind of just became old news quickly. I felt like this was going to have a bigger steer over the whole story because of the fact that it was the main focal point of the synopsis. So it did surprise me, and admittedly I feel like that could disappoint people who are buying this book because they feel like it's going to be a murder mystery set in this closed off eerie town. Another plot point that I liked, and it is introduced really late into the story, is Maggie's pregnancy, and the way that that was handled really did surprise me. I loved how honest this was, and it didn't really go for that cliche of, oh, somebody's pregnant and this is the greatest thing ever, everybody should be happy because it's a baby. Because let's be honest, we all know that's a fucking lie. I also like the harsh dramatic irony that Mark was trying to make these moves so that Maggie didn't have to have this baby. Like, they went to an abortion clinic, and then Mark even went to talk to his mother to see if there's some way that they could sacrifice this baby to save Eden, and then Maggie ended up having a miscarriage anyway. Him moving into the role of the sheriff also surprised me as well. Now, I'm not known for picking up on the subtleties of a story, but I didn't really see that coming, and I didn't really see any foreshadowing to it. Especially when you look at her connections with the FBI and the way that she handled that storyline, and the fact that she's killed quite a few people in this town. I just didn't really see that coming, but I'm glad that it happened. It has that nice parallel between Mark and his mother as well, because obviously she ended up going out with the sheriff too. However, one thing that really didn't sit well and didn't stick the landing for me was how demonic the book got towards the end. So you get another flashback and you find out that Laura and Isaac, when Eden was originally being created, sacrificed one of their kids to kind of satisfy this demonic god so that it could protect Eden better, or something like that. And obviously Laura's getting all these like nightmares where the sins of her past are coming back to haunt her. And sure, there had always been weird stuff going on throughout this town, and you got this sense that the history of Eden hadn't ever really fully been explained to you, and that there was some secrets that were being buried deep within. But it felt as if they got too late into the book, realised that there weren't too many horror elements, and then just crammed this really weird one into it. Oddly as well, and I feel like this may disappoint 1% of the people who might read this book, considering the title, there is very little post that gets delivered after the first half of this book. Now we've reached my final verdict where I'm going to summarise my thoughts and also give a final score for anybody who might be on the fence. This book was greatly enjoyable. Is it perfect? No. I also feel like the book that I was sold wasn't the one that I got, but that's okay. If you're expecting a murder mystery set in a creepy town, you're not really going to get that past the first couple of issues. But after that, what I did get was a book that I enjoyed even more. This is an intense, political family drama that just builds with every single development. Sure, not everything that he tries to do sticks the landing, and there are large parts of the story that actually contribute little to the whole. The end conflict and some of the revelations that came with it did fall a little bit flat, along with the fact that a lot of the good stuff that did come in those final issues is negated by the subsequent one-shots and the fact that it's got a continuing sequel series now. Like honestly, I'm not too sure if I needed more Postal after I finished this book, but I would still give it a read. And that's because the first book here was intense, it was great at handling these complex moral issues, and made me remember that there's different genres within the comic book medium that I really enjoy. So although this probably wasn't the best choice for a Halloween read, the journey that Postal takes you on and the characters it introduces you to along the way is well worth the time that you would invest in this book, and for me it's getting a very high score of 4 out of 5 woofs. Woof 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 woof. But one thing that really did bug me about this book is the fact that you can't see any of the covers in full size. All of them have been shrunk and you think there might be a cover gallery at the end, but even worse, it's just even smaller than that. Look. That's something that really angers me when you're buying like a deluxe premium product and it still doesn't even have the covers at proper size. So that's my review of Postal, and I'm hoping that if you voted for this book as the read through of October that you have really enjoyed it. To give you some good news, I am currently reading Nailbiter. You might be able to see that volume 1 is not on the shelf, so hopefully I'm going to try and get a review out of that for you as well. Might not be before Halloween, but still it's a great book series that I'm hoping you'll enjoy the review for. But I want to know what you think, because I know Postal is quite polarising. There's some people that absolutely love it and there's some people that really dislike it. Whatever your thoughts on it are, let me know down below so that we can discuss it a bit further. As well, if somebody's got an opinion that you don't like or that you disagree with or is different from you, don't be a dick about it. The comment section's meant to be fun for everybody and I don't want anybody to feel like they can't put a comment or can't share their thoughts because somebody's being a dick to them. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like this video, why did you get this far? Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, it really helps the channel, and I genuinely can't believe that we're less than 200 subscribers away from reaching 1,000 and I still don't have a clue what I'm going to do. As well, if you want to contribute to what type of videos come out on this channel, follow some of my social media links up there because I'm always putting polls to get discussion ideas for future videos. And if you do want to support the channel, it's greatly appreciated. I'm not going to ask for you to donate or give a Patreon or anything like that, but all I do ask is that you treat yourself to a book, maybe Postal, and just use one of the Amazon affiliate links down below. I can't see any of your details, it doesn't increase the price, it just means that eventually I'm going to be able to buy a new camera. But that's the video, and if I don't see you before, I hope you all have a great Halloween, watch all the films that you like, reread all the books that scare the shit out of you, but more than anything, just make sure that you stay safe, keep reading, and keep barking all you mad dogs, and I'll see you at the next video.